presentation by going to a11yoz.com/FAF16-mobile, and I'm going to put that URL at the end of the presentation as well. You can follow along, add comments, send me an email, things like that. So yeah, feel free to use that. Also, my Twitter handle is @AccessibilityAus, so feel free to tweet, and I'll tweet out the URL to the presentation at the end. So my name is Gianne Wild. Who here has some experience with web accessibility? Who here hears the word accessibility and goes, I have no idea what you're talking about? Okay, so web accessibility, the kind of primer, is all about making sure websites can be used by people with disabilities. You achieve it by following the W3C Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which were released in 2008. And I spent 6 years at the W3C contributing to WCAG too, so I know it quite well. And just as a thank you for attending, feel free to email or tweet or come up to me afterwards and give me your email address, and I'll give you access to Auswiki, which is our database of accessibility errors, screenshots, code, examples and solutions, over 1,000 examples. Usually it costs money, but we're giving 3 months free access to anyone who attends my presentations, so thank you for coming. This is my team. We actually started in Australia 5 years ago, and we incorporated in the US last year. So I've got a team of about that size in Australia and a team about the same size in the US. Now, when I started the company, I wanted to mimic the percentage of people with disabilities in the general population in my own organisation. And so at the moment, 65% of my staff have some kind of disability. Now, you wouldn't know that to look at any of us. We all look very normal. And so it's important to know that disability is often hidden in plain sight. It's not something that you will necessarily know about a person, and it's not something that people are often ready to disclose. So over the years, we've had people with dyslexia, moderate vision impairment, severe vision impairment, epilepsy, migraines, physical impairments, fibromyalgia, multiple sclerosis, Crohn's disease, post-traumatic stress disorder, and Asperger's. In the US, 38 million Americans have some kind of disability, and the largest group is by far the group of people with physical impairments. 20 million Americans have some kind of physical impairment. 14 million have cognitive impairments. And it's important to know that cognitive impairments doesn't necessarily mean intellectual impairments. It could be something like dyslexia or other reading difficulties. 11 million people have hearing difficulties and 7 million have vision impairments. So it's important to also remember that it's not just about vision impairments. The web is, very multidimensional, and it affects all groups of people with disabilities, not just people with vision impairments. So if you need any assistance with web accessibility, please feel free to contact us. We do testing, we build websites, video accessibility, Word document accessibility, user testing, etc. We have 3 products. AusPlayer, the world's only fully accessible video player that you can use to, play videos that are on YouTube and host them on your website, embed them into your website. It's actually free for not-for-profits that have an annual revenue under $1 million or websites that have less than 10 videos. AusArt, an automated accessibility testing tool, and Auswiki, as I mentioned. So let's talk about mobile accessibility. Mobile accessibility is a little bit different to desktop accessibility. Firstly, there are native screen readers that are inbuilt to the mobiles that you purchase. So with desktop, you often have to purchase a separate screen reader, with the exception of OS, which has VoiceOver installed natively. So on Android, there's a screen reader called TalkBack. On Windows phones, there's a screen reader called Narrator, and on iOS, there's a screen reader called VoiceOver. There's also text-to-speech recognition, volume control, visual, auditory and vibrational notifications, haptic keyboards, and Zoom. There are a bunch of system accessibility settings that you can modify in your settings section, including font size, touch and hold delay, screen rotation, high contrast, assisted touch, and mono audio. So when it comes to accessibility on mobile, there is actually some correlation between mobile site and app accessibility and website accessibility. And website accessibility is addressed by following the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. However, because WCAG 2, which is the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, was released in 2008, it was before we had basically the mobile web, which we have now. And so there are some things that are missing. So for example, WCAG 2 requires that sites and apps can be used by a keyboard only. However, it doesn't require that a site or an app can be used just by the mouse only or just by touch only. So you need to go a little bit further when it comes to looking at mobile site and app accessibility. It's not sufficient just to look at WCAG 2. So let's have a look at mobile usage. In January 2014, what happened is people, when they spent time on digital, ended up spending more time on mobile or tablet devices than they did on a desktop. So it's really important, even if you think your website or your mobile app, your website's not going to be used on a mobile, it will be. And you can see this by this later graph, which shows that over the last couple of years, the amount of time spent on mobile has increased by 12%, and the amount of time spent on desktop has decreased by 12%. So it is something that's increasing over and over again. And people with disabilities, they also use mobile devices as well. If you think about someone who's vision impaired and they can't see and they're walking around with a cane or a guide dog, there's no point in them dragging around a laptop. It's not going to help them anyway, they can't see the screen. It makes much more sense to use the screen reader that's inherent in this device and walk around. My personal assistant is completely blind and she's forever posting to Slack, "Oh, it's a beautiful day outside, so I'm working from the garden." You know, and that can't happen with us because of, glare and all that kind of stuff, but, she does everything via a screen reader, so she can work wherever she likes. So it is important to know that people who use screen readers on the web, they often use screen readers on mobile as well. So around 70 to 80% of all people that use screen readers also use it on their mobile device. Now this is a great survey if you're interested in screen reader usage. It's by WebAIM. They run a screen reader every year or so. They run a survey every year or so. You can see that the percentage has gone down this last year, and that's due to the fact that they did a big push amongst older users to answer the questions in the survey. So they actually had a much larger representation of older users in the later group, which is why that percentage of people using screen readers on mobile devices decreased slightly. So, mobile-specific issues. So I'm going to go through some of the major accessibility issues in mobile sites and apps. And you're going to look at these things and think, well, that's a usability issue. That's really annoying to everybody. And that is actually the case. That's kind of the point of my presentation. So if you're bored, please feel free and leave, because that's the moral, is basically if it's annoying to you, it's going to be impossible for people with disabilities to use. So everything that I mention here is an accessibility failure, but it's also something that, no one in their right mind would necessarily think was a good idea. So first off, PDFs. So this is what happens when you open a PDF on a mobile. You wait, and you wait, and you think, and then you get it and you can't read it, it doesn't reflow, text size is terrible, colour contrast ridiculous, it's annoying. Versus HTML, reflows, nice text size, etc. So we worked on energy rating, which is kind of like your Energy Star. And on the left was what the site originally was, which was mostly a PDF, and the right was the site we ended up building. The thing to remember with PDFs is that PDFs are usually a larger file size than HTML, and on a mobile you've got a slower connection than you do on, say your computer at work. So what this means is it takes longer to download for the end user, but it also increases their data usage. So that means unhappy customers, and they get something that they can't use anyway. And who tweets PDFs? Has anyone ever opened a Facebook post and gone, oh yeah, there's that PDF that I want to share with everyone? PDFs are not the way to go. I've got a whole presentation about it, so if you're interested, have a look at the conferences section on my website, on the Accessibility Oz website, and yeah, there's a presentation on it. Okay, so you really do need to think about making things specifically friendly to mobile, whether that's a separate MDOT site or a responsive site. So on the left was energy rating before we got it, and we built a mobile app. Once again, much nicer. Once again, much friendlier to the user. You know exactly what you're looking at, etc., as opposed to having to go through this crazy table. Another issue is autoplay. Autoplay is one of the most serious accessibility issues under WCAG 2. Basically, if a video automatically plays, it reads over the top of a user's screen reader, which someone who's vision impaired uses to read the content. So this is Jamie Oliver's recipes, and when you open the mobile app for the first time, it throws you to your native video on your device and plays the video, no captions, nothing like that, and it doesn't take you back to the recipes when you're done. Now, that's obvious to us because we can visually see it, but someone who's using a screen reader, completely difficult to use. The other thing we see is the use of slideshows on websites. Now, slideshows need to be able to be paused. They need to be able to be paused on mobile just like they should be on desktop. The problem with slideshows on mobile is that they take up so much screen real estate. So it's something that you could maybe scroll past or ignore on a desktop actually takes up most of the screen. And it can be so distracting to some users that they can't use the site at all. So it's really important that you have a way to pause that slideshow. Also, if you are looking at building slideshows, we created an accessible slideshow for a couple of organisations, and it's available under Creative Commons. So if you're interested in it, feel free to contact me and we can send you the code. It's based on Flex Slider, I think. Okay, traps. Does anyone here not know what a keyboard trap is? Okay, excellent. Thank you for putting your hands up. Okay, a keyboard trap is where you're navigating through the site using the keyboard instead of using the mouse, and you get trapped in a certain element, usually like a video or something like that, and you can't actually escape. You can't go backwards, you can't go forwards. The only way you can escape is to close the browser and start again. So it's one of those non-interference clauses of WCAG 2. It's very, very problematic. Now, there are a whole bunch of different traps on mobile. The first one is the on-screen keyboard trap, which is where the on-screen keyboard pops up and you can't dismiss it. Most devices have a way of dismissing the keyboard now, but not all of them do. So this is a major issue because it takes up half the screen, can't be closed, really restricts what it is that you can see. So once again, can't dismiss the keyboard. This is what we call a hover trap. So on a desktop, if you're looking at this site, you'd use the mouse to move over the item and you get a zoomed in portion to the right. What happens on a mobile site is you tap on the dress and you get a zoomed in portion on the right, and there's no way to get that zoomed in portion to close. If you tap anywhere else on the page, doesn't matter. So we call that a hover trap. VoiceOver swipe trap. So the way to navigate using VoiceOver on mobile is to swipe like this. And so that's basically almost tabbing using a keyboard. This is the LinkedIn status update for the LinkedIn mobile app. And so when you've written your status and you go to post it, it says, do you want to post it to public or connections? And you can't actually move off that arrow. You can't go back, you can't go forward, so you have to basically close the application and start again. This is a different swipe trap where someone who's using touch can just touch on the greyed out area. The keyboard drops down. You can access all the stuff that's on the front page of YouTube. You can't access that information with VoiceOver. You're trapped in that search box. There's also a swipe trap in Facebook where if you swipe over to your friends list, you can't actually close your friends list and get back to your news features. And this is one I found quite recently. I've called it a touch trap. In the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little arrow, which is grey on a white background. It's very difficult to see. And basically, swiping doesn't work once you get to the bottom of the page. You can't swipe to go back up the page because the only way you can go back to the top of the page is by activating that arrow. Okay, so alternatives. It's really important that you provide alternatives to any non-text content. So, most people know that you need alternatives to images, but you need alternatives to buttons as well. So this is the Coles mobile app, and there are 4 buttons at the bottom. Lists, specials, product index and more, and none of them have alternatives, and so they're read as button, 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 button. Another thing we see a lot of is custom inputs for fields. You really need to use HTML5. There's no point building your own custom input because once you use HTML5, it will actually be treated properly on the mobile device. So here, with a drop-down, you can only really choose 14, 15 or 16 because it sees it as a free text field as opposed to a select box. Text size is a big thing, so, well, I didn't mean to make that joke. Text size is a big issue because it's often very small because people are trying to cram as much content into a small amount of space. Now, you need to always make sure that pinch zoom is active on your sites and apps because there are going to be people that find that they need to increase text size. It doesn't matter too much if your text size is small if you can activate pinch zoom. But on all these examples, pinch zoom didn't work. So this is Etsy, and as you can see, the text is pretty small. This is Virgin Australia. This is a mobile app that you get to use when you're on the Virgin Australia flight from Australia to the US. They don't have any wireless because in Australia we're back in the dark ages. But all we do have is access to this mobile app, which in the bottom right-hand corner, I assume tells you how far away you are from LA, what the temperature is, what the time is, etc. However, the text is so small that I can't read it, and pinch zoom is not enabled. So someone built that on a big 28-inch screen, and they never actually tested it on a device. And I have an iPhone 6 Plus, so I have one of the biggest mobile devices out there, and I couldn't read it. If you are going to support the text size settings within mobile, you need to make sure that you test with that. So, for example, on the left, that's where you specified in the settings that the text size is very small. And on the right, you can see that with the underlapping of content, the large size text settings is not supported. And we see this with Urban Spoon as well, where, Discover, Cuisine, Open4, basically the spacing is not increased as text size is increased. Ironically, even Apple got this wrong. So in small text, you can read that it says apps that support dynamic type will adjust to your preferred reading size below. And when you increase it to large text, it reads apps that support die, ... They did fix that recently. Then we see apps that support large size, but they're not really large size. So this is the largest text possible on the Twitter app. BBC has its own text size increase function, but once again, it's not very large. This is the ABC website. Once again, it's not particularly large, but the biggest problem with this is that although it increases the text size of the article, it doesn't increase the text size of the article title or the captions. So on the left is when the text size is small, on the right is when the text size is as large as possible, and they look exactly the same. Another big issue is colour contrast. Amazon, grey text on a white background. Tell me what's the one thing that you usually do when you get to the Amazon website? Search. So it's kind of the number one thing, and it's grey text on a white background. And there'll be a huge number of people that will not be able to read that content and therefore will miss it entirely. But at least they weren't eBay, which is grey text on a grey background. Once again, it's something we see a lot in mobile apps. I'm not sure why they're so popular. And then LinkedIn, their connections is kind of like a medium grey on a light grey background. So it is something that we see a lot of, and it's really, really difficult for people to read. Sticking with colour, it's important not to convey information with colour alone for two reasons. A screen reader doesn't read aloud a change in colour, but also people who have colour contrast issues aren't necessarily going to know the difference between one colour and another. So here the current date is indicated in colour alone. In this, the dates for delivery that are available are in green and the unavailable dates are in black. The other thing we see a lot of is broken functionality, and we really, these things shouldn't happen at all. So this is Kmart. About 2/3 of the screen is taken up with a link to basically their catalogue, and if you activate it on an iOS device, you get a blank page because the catalogue is Flash. Now, iOS has never ever supported Flash, and in the Western world, iOS devices are by far the most popular devices. So no one actually tested this. No one looked at their Google stats. No one actually went out in the real world and had a look. This is Airbnb. If you're going to support pinch zoom, you need to test it so that there's no overlapping or underlapping. I mean, it gets quite ridiculous to the point where you can't see anything at all. Now, they do have the ability to jump to the desktop site, which is great, but when you do that, it loses all your content, which is incredibly annoying. And one of the things to remember is that there are going to be users that access your site through a mobile device and a mobile device only. So you need to have the same content on your mobile device that you have on a desktop site. Now, that should be fairly straightforward. If it's a responsive site, if it's an MDOT site, you need to provide a way to link to that full version of the site. Functionality unclear. So there's a whole lot of feedback mechanisms on desktops that you don't get on mobile. So for example, you can hover over something to see if it's active, you get a scroll bar, etc. That doesn't happen on mobile. So, which one is it? Is it one way or return? Like, I think it's one way, but I'm not too sure. And this one, select from zero. I'm not going to buy that item because I don't know what it is that I'm purchasing. And make sure that you're consistent. So here you've got a bunch of black text and green text. On the right-hand side, there's some green text that says, call Michael, call Matthew, call Feroz. And if you tap them, it activates phone call. On the left-hand side, they've got mobile numbers and they've got a cut-off version of the email address. So you'd think that if you tapped on the mobile number or you tapped on the email address, it would respectively create a phone call or create an email. It doesn't. So it's just plain text, even though it looks like it should be active. And the problem is that the entire email address isn't actually there. So it's not that you can even look at it and then type it in because you can't see the entire email address. This is something else. Often we think grey is inactive. So here you've got name, email, phone, postcode, and they're not. If you tap on them, they're actually fields. It's also, as I said, important that you have the same functionality across a bunch of different devices. So the YouTube site is responsive, and so what happens is if someone's on a desktop site and they've increased their text size to 200% or more, what happens is it assumes that it's on a mobile device and it gives you the mobile version, and as a result the upload and notifications buttons completely disappear. So if someone's looking at the YouTube site with large text, they actually can't upload a video. This is Asana. We used to use Asana all the time until I found Trello. And when we used Asana, I would only ever operate off my tasks. So my staff knew to assign things to me. If it was sitting in a project or with someone else, they knew that I'd never really see it, and I only ever worked off my tasks. Now on the mobile app, there is no My Tasks. For some reason, you just can't access it. Row New York City. So I actually ran this presentation for the first time in New York at the Future of Web Design, and so I decided I'd put in an example from them. So once again, you know, the desktop site has information about how would you like to create your New York City and, you know, the kind of things that are happening at the time, whereas the mobile site doesn't have anything like that. So those are the kind of things people are likely to look at, you know, when they're, you know, in the taxi on the way to the hotel. Another thing to look at is pixelation on Zoom. Now this is a, once again, that Virgin Australia flight. They gave you access to one online magazine called Raw. And if you liked it, you could buy more. Now you could only access it online, you could only access it with your mobile. And these had, you know, a list of books that they thought that you might be interested in. And as you can see, you can't even read the title of the book. So once again, no one actually tested that in real life. And this is, they had a little self-help section, and once again, you know, just completely impossible to read. And so it's not something that I'm going to go, that's worth paying for. Source order. Important information should never be after a submit button. People who use screen readers or who use magnifiers or just have difficulty moving through a page, if there's a form, they're going to submit their details, they'll never get to the content underneath. And this is also a bigger deal on mobile because you don't have a scroll bar, so you don't know that there's, by looking at the scroll bar, that you're not at the end of the page. So this is a Broadway ticket for The Lion King, and fine tickets, that's what you get when you open the page. It looks like it's a full page, it looks like there's nothing underneath it, but when you scroll down, there's a bunch of information, especially about requesting accessible tickets. So that's something that a whole lot of people are going to miss. I flew United to the US last time, and they had internet access, which was wonderful. But Virgin Australia, as I mentioned, we're back in the dark ages, so they didn't have internet access. And I was going to purchase something, so I wanted to log into LastPass to get our credit card details, and I put in our details, and it said, no network connectivity detected. And I thought, come on, like I know that most of it's online, but shouldn't you be able to access it? And it was only when I put this example into the presentation that I saw at the bottom there are two options: remember password and log in offline. Now, wouldn't you think that if you got no network connectivity, that it would say no network connectivity, would you like to log in offline? But it's something that I didn't even see. And even Apple can't get this right, because once again, it was one night, I thought, okay, I will finally update my iPhone, and I must have tapped that little install now button that was greyed out 5 or 6 times, going, why is this not working? And then I finally read the tiny little grey text on the grey background underneath, which says, this update requires at least 50% battery or to be connected to a power source. So once again, it's something that we don't look at, people with disabilities are just never going to see. Touch targets. So you need to provide enough space for people to actually activate touch targets. So the kind of accepted size is 7 to 10 millimetres squared. So this is Twitterrific, which is great in a lot of ways, but they're little retweets and favourites and things like that. Their touch targets are too small. You can see major problems with something like this. This is also from Coles. In order to, if you swipe on the map, you've got to move the map. If you actually want to swipe up and down the page, you have to somehow hit that little tiny bit of white at the top or on the right-hand side. So I call that the zoom of doom. And sticking with Coles, this is something that I've no idea how they managed to do this, but you need to be able to activate links on removal of touch. So if someone's swiping, then it doesn't activate when you hit here. You activate only when you remove your finger. This doesn't happen on this screen, so if you just scroll down and accidentally hit South Australia, it'll take you down to that page. This particular page lists every Coles store in Australia. There's thousands. So if you accidentally hit something and you want to go back to the top, you have to scroll back. It takes about 12 seconds because there's no back to top link. So once again, incredibly annoying. So along with touch targets, there's spacing. So once again with Asana, there's an edit button in the top right-hand corner and a mark complete button also there. They're the complete opposite of each other. You do not want options that are the complete opposite right next to each other because people will accidentally hit one or another. This is Airbnb. If you go to the website, it says, do you want to install the Airbnb app? The only way not to install is by hitting that very, very small cross in the top left-hand corner. If you hit anything else, it will install the app. Okay, so we do see a lot of lack of testing. So this is the YouTube app. Text that's in all capitals usually gets read differently to text that's in lowercase. So here, best of YouTube is read as best of YouTube by VoiceOver. This here is Target. They have some sales. So you activate one of those options and it says your search for 5662, 6957, 56626, etc., found 4 product results. Now, what's the problem with that? It's annoying. You might get away with something like that on a desktop device because it doesn't take up as much screen space and you can sort of see from context that it's what you're after. But that takes up a quarter of the screen and it's going to make your users just a little bit unsure of, the validity of the content that they're looking at. This is Coles again, it's a separate MDOT site where the content is just squished. So once again, people never actually looked at it on a device. This is one of my favourite clothes shops back in Melbourne and their location is in longitude and latitude. Can you imagine giving that to your Uber driver? So once again, this is not the way that people operate. And just in case you weren't aware, that's actually not an accurate map of Australia. That's the western side of Australia, actually named Western Australia. Basically, no one lives in Western Australia, but you can horizontally scroll so you can see the rest of Australia, which is great. But once again, no one actually tested this. To the point where this is like a Deliveroo, and they say we deliver in Sydney and who knows, probably Melbourne, but yeah. And there's no way to horizontally scroll. This is Drupal South, and you can see conference and tracks are overlapping each other. Once again, mobile site, web conference, you really think they could do better. It is important that you test things and just don't make stupid mistakes like spelling mistakes. So this one is 10 cafe customers that are more annoyed than parents with blah, blah, blah. And it just makes your users not too sure about your content. Once again, don't post broken links, that kind of stuff. And this is really my social media and accessibility presentation in one slide, which is all of a sudden, about a year ago, all this code started showing up in the headings of Facebook. So here it says span class equals quo, end span, why sacrifice yourself, whistleblowers, ... And it's not that everyone got together and said, let's put HTML in our headings. It's that Facebook changed something and all of a sudden the code that you put in there was hidden, started showing up. Now, most people got onto it within a couple of days, but Crikey, which is a bit of like an alternative newspaper, took about 2 or 3 weeks before they actually fixed it. And so that's why you have to continually test, because they might change something. And that's why social media is not accessible, because they change so often that even if they fluked and they managed to make a fully accessible social media platform, you know, one day it's not going to be accessible the next, because they change so often. So this is when I was on that Virgin Australia flight and I got to LA and waiting on the tarmac and connect to the LAX Wi-Fi, and they give you 30 minutes free and then you have to pay. And it says, this page will redirect, so content doesn't really make sense to have here. And all of a sudden I don't want to give you my credit card details because you obviously don't know what it is that you are displaying to the user. Errors. So this kind of error is going to make a user leave your site and never come back. I love this. Error. Cancel. Okay, I'll cancel the error. Still doesn't work. This is Apple Books in San Francisco. Their M.dot site looks like that, and you can't scroll horizontally, but if you look at the desktop site, it looks exactly the same, and you can scroll horizontally. So the desktop site actually works better on mobile than the M.dot site. And this is Qantas. Qantas flies to a lot of places. I don't even know where Aberdeen is, or Abidjan, or Accra. There's no way to jump to a letter, so if I want to fly from Sydney to Melbourne, I've got to scroll down to Melbourne. It takes 8 seconds. Now, it might take 8 seconds for me, it might take 45 minutes for someone with a disability. So all of a sudden, they're not going to want to go back and use your site. So that was all the bad. Now I want to talk about some correct implementations. So this is Twitterrific. Twitterrific has some pretty good size support. I mean, certainly you could have a better increase in text size, but it's better than nothing. And it also supports changes in colour, which some people like. And, you know, your text messages support system settings. This is our website. There will be some people that want to view your content that large, where they see only a letter or two at a time on the screen. This is State Library New South Wales, where if you zoom in, you know, you don't get pixelation or anything like that. This is Time magazine, where it actually indicates that there's additional functionality. So don't assume people are going to scroll left and right and things like that. You need to tell users that that functionality is there. So there's a little sign on the left that says tap. And this is Guardian, and their images, they serve small images and they have little arrows on the images, and if you tap the arrow, it serves you the larger image so you can zoom in and it not pixelate. I didn't get a great screenshot of this, but this is Amazon. When you go to the search results, it has a little animation that says tap on the side. It disappears. It's not accessible because, you know, screen readers, magnifier users aren't going to see it, but, you know, it helps some people to indicate there's more there. This is the Washington Post. At the bottom, there's a row of dots. The first one is white and the rest are grey on a black background, so colour contrast not great, but it indicates that if you swipe to the left, you actually just swipe automatically to the next article. This is another way of indicating that there's content horizontally, where they've cut off half a person's photo, so you know that there's basically more information to the right. This one has the ability to close the keyboard, but also has the ability to move from field to field, just using the keyboard, not going back to the site. Correct inputs. So the mobile is coded as an HTML5 input telephone, or TEL, and therefore it actually displays the right numeric keypad. This is Airbnb, and so they use both colour and shape. You have to code some stuff behind the scenes as well, but this means that someone who's got colour contrast issues are going to still be able to figure out what their starting date is and what their ending date is. This one's an interesting one. As I said, I spent 6 years with the W3C writing WCAG 2, and I actually worked on a lot of level AAA requirements. And one of the things that we required is that column width shouldn't be more than 80 characters. Now, you don't need to worry about that because most of the world requires AA compliance, not AAA compliance. AAA compliance is a higher level. But I remember talking to the group, and there are some people who are like, that's never going to happen. You're never going to get people that have a width of 80 characters. We've got these desktops that are, getting wider and wider, and yet that's what mobile basically does, is force this kind of small column size. And this kind of width is a lot easier to read for people who have reading difficulties like dyslexia and things like that. So, those are the kind of things that you need to watch out for. Now, one of the best things that you can do is go to the BBC Mobile Accessibility Guidelines. They were written specifically for the BBC, so they don't talk about e-commerce, for example, but they have a whole bunch of requirements for mobile sites and mobile apps. One of their drawbacks is that they've actually merged the requirements for mobile sites and mobile apps. So you've got HTML and iOS coding and Android coding all in the same area, but they are very, very helpful. So that, and do look at WCAG too when you're looking at a mobile site. And as I mentioned, there's AusWiki, but we also have this thing called the Accessibility Fact Sheets. They're freely available. They were commissioned by the Australian Government, and they're on our website, and we have them on different categories like tables, content, forms, JavaScript. So if you want to learn more about a particular category in accessibility, please have a look at that. And I just want to, that's the URL to the presentation. I just want to leave you with one example. I flew United recently, and for some reason, I had a dentist appointment the day before I left, and the dentist said, "Oh my God, we have to take out your wisdom teeth." And I was like, "Well, I'm flying international tomorrow, so I don't think so." She said, "Well, no, I can't wait till you get back." So I was like, "Okay, well, fine." So I had to move my flight by 24 hours, so I lost my premium and economy seat. And then as I was organising my new flight, I saw that I could check in online, which you can't do for international flights in Australia. So I checked in online, and it said, "Would you like to upgrade to a first class seat for $500? And I was like, "Well, yeah, but I'm pretty sure there's a catch there, because first class seats from Australia to the US go for about $10,000. So, I looked at it and I was like, this is not true. So I went to my laptop and I used the check-in on the desktop site, and it said, "Would you like to upgrade to first class for $5,500? And I was like, well, I'm going back to my mobile and I'm pressing yes. So I got to fly first class, but that is the kind of thing that could cause major problems for United, because basically they're giving a $5,000 discount to people that use their site and their app on a mobile device. Now, someone who can't use their mobile app because it's not accessible, but can use their desktop, that is exactly the kind of thing that they could sue United over, because they're basically getting a raw deal. Okay, thank you very much.